says all the time, I mean, it's part of her standard stump speech, how her parents came to America and found a land of opportunity, and, you know, whoever thought that, you know, a little black girl from you know, wherever, I guess she lived in Wisconsin actually for a while, you know, could grow up to be vice president of the United States. I mean, she's clearly grateful for America. And that's why it's fairly obvious that when JD Vance said this, he wasn't talking about real gratitude or expressions of gratitude. What he was talking about was that she's not sufficiently deferential. That women, particularly black women, but women in general, and I'll expand on this in a moment, need to be humble in the face of white wealth and power. And instead of, you know, gratefully deferring to the white men who are born to rule, she's a pretender to the role of president, a usurper of the power and privilege that never should have been in the hands of a woman, particularly a woman of color. I mean, keep in mind, this is the same JD Vance who, along with 8 other Republican senators and about 25, I think 24 members of the House, Republican members of the House, one of those other senators was Ted Cruz, by the way, who's also up for re-election this year, wrote a letter to HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. What was that letter about? Well, Javier Becerra issued a rule. You know, he runs Health and Human Services, and he issued a rule nationwide that says that police cannot demand the health records of women, menstruation records, pregnancy records, whatever. What the Republicans are particularly interested in is menstruation records. That police cannot just go to a doctor's office or a hospital and say, I want the records of this woman so-and-so, you know, without a court order. And so JD Vance and Ted Cruz and 6 of their colleagues in the Senate, Republicans, wrote a letter to Javier Becerra saying, you can't do that. You need to immediately withdraw that rule. Why? Because they want police to be able to access the menstrual and other health records so that prosecutors and police in red states can keep track of women. This is the menstrual police. Can keep track of women and find out when they're pregnant, and then, you know, catch them if they order some mail-order mifepristone, or if they travel out of state to get an abortion, they can nail them. I mean, I'm not even speculating here. They will tell you that. I mean, Vance and Cruz and the Republicans on the Supreme Court, they're all big fans of the menstrual police. Why? Well, because when women can't control their reproductive capacity, it's very difficult for them to sustain a career in the workforce or in politics, which is exactly what Republicans, you know, the goal of Republicans is to remove women from the workforce, competition for men, you know, and from government. Pretty straightforward stuff. And so, you know, now it kind of falls into context that Harris's lack of a submissive attitude of gratitude to rich white men like Trump, Vance, and the billionaires who own the GOP, and, you know, is the logical result of the white men on the Supreme Court in 1965 in the Griswold case, which legalized birth control, and in 73, the Roe v. Wade case that legalized abortion, letting her have a career as a district attorney and a prosecutor and a state attorney general and the vice president. They let her, and she's not grateful for that. She's not sufficiently appreciative. I mean, JD Vance is pretty clear about this stuff. In 2022, when he was running for the U.S. Senate, which, by the way, was his first and only public experience, you know, public office experience. This was the same year, by the way, that a 10-year-old girl who was raped by a relative had to flee Ohio to get an abortion. He represents Ohio. In 2022, he was asked, do you think that there should be exceptions for rape and incest in the state's abortion ban? And he said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Rape followed by an abortion, that's 2 wrongs. 2 wrongs don't make a right. He added that the fetus or the zygote should take primacy over the woman. Which is more important? Well, here's a verbatim quote. He said, it's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, it's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow inconvenient. That question really, to me, is about the baby. In other words, forget about the woman. This is all about babies. Noting that women today regard children as, quote, inconveniences to be discarded instead of blessings to cherish. This guy, who in 2019, by the way, converted to Catholicism, added in an interview with the Catholic Current newspaper, he said, there's something comparable between abortion and slavery. I think it has a morally distorting effect on the entire society. He went on to argue that the Comstock Act, which outlaws any device that can be used to produce an abortion or any drug that can be used for abortion from being sent through the mail, FedEx, UPS, or any other common carrier, the 1874, I think it is, Comstock Act, which is still on the books, as Clarence Thomas pointed out recently from the bench in the Supreme Court. The Comstock Act would end all abortions in America. And JD Vance has come out and said, we need to enforce the Comstock Act. Well, that'll shut up those uppity, ungrateful women. He's also apparently upset that women have the right to no-fault divorce. He's come out, this is another one of his great quotes. He says, this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is the idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term, end quote. He says sarcastically. He calls Kamala Harris a childless cat lady. He called AOC that also, and Pete Buttigieg. Now, for the record, Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg they're both parents of children. Kamala has two stepchildren with her husband, Doug Emhoff, from his first marriage. And Pete and Chastain, his husband, have adopted two children, twins, in fact. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
4-hour Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today. We're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in This Vast Southern Empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Friday. TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. It is the end of the week. It is Anything Goes Friday. It's you and me for the next 3 hours. No guests today. And we got a lot to talk about, though. We're going to be talking about James Donald Bowman. Who is that, you may ask? Well, he grew up in the suburbs of Cincinnati, a little suburb called Middleton, Ohio. Does that give you any clues? Not a particularly poor guy. He went to Yale, got his law degree. Oh, he changed his middle name to David from James Donald Bowman. And then he changed his name again to Jimmy Hamill. And then 10 years ago, when he got married, he changed his name to JD Vance. We will be talking about, who is this guy, right? Hey, Republicans, where have all the babies gone? I want to get into that. I've got some news stories for you here. Trump expresses fear about debating Kamala. Yeah, he's terrified. No, seriously, I don't mean that sarcastically. Biden nominates Val Demmings to the Postal Board of Governors. That's good news, although he had to nominate a Republican as well, who said that he wholeheartedly supports Louis DeJoy. This is the problem. The nominations come in twos, The Obamas endorsed Kamala. Did I just say that the way Trump says it? I did, didn't I? It's going to take a while. The Obamas endorsed Kamala, and JD Vance reveals his dystopian, scary future for women. So all that in the news summary here in the first hour. It's being reported that Project 2025 has close ties to the radical group Opus Dei. I want to get into that in the second hour of the program. And Texas police tried to arrest a librarian for checking out a civil rights book. Is this the world we want to live in? Oh, also, how the Proud Boys are preparing for the second Trump term, and the Jezebel, this is in the third hour, the Jezebel slur now being hurled at Harris. And of course, your thoughts on how the campaign is going, how Harris is doing. I am just loving this freedom meme that she has rolled out. It's, as I mentioned yesterday, it's one I've been using for years. It's one I recommended in my 2010 book, Rebooting the American Dream, that Bernie Sanders gave to all 99 senators. But I recommended the Democrats be using this. So it is, it's pretty cool stuff. But my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, Hey Republicans, where have all the babies gone? And this is based on a new report that just came out this week from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Health Statistics. For 25 years, there has been a steady decline in infant mortality in America. The infant mortality is broadly described as babies dying at or soon after birth. Last year, well, the year before last, 2022, the first Dobbs year, and by the way, in Texas, where an estimated 24,000 women have been raped and impregnated in the last year and can't get abortions. In Texas, they had banned abortion even before 2022. I believe it was the end of 2021. It might have been early 2022, but I'm pretty sure it was late 2021. So you had, one large state with a huge population that had already banned abortions. So we saw a 3% increase in infant mortality. And what's interesting is that this hit white women harder than it hit black women, which is extremely unusual. Black women have about 3 times the infant mortality rate of white women, and that's because of structural racism in America. It's just the clear oppression of black people, whether it's growing up in poverty or living in food deserts or living in areas where there's not good access to medical care, or simply not having access to medical care because you live in a red state, particularly in the South, where the governor has not expanded Medicaid, and so you have to pay if you want to go see a doctor. And so anyway, white women were hit the hardest, which suggests that this is not structural racism, but instead the clear result of these Republican abortion bans. And sure enough, the Washington Post reports, this is from also this week, this was just day before yesterday, that physicians are fleeing red states. Here's a quote. This is, not so long ago, Bonner General Health, a hospital in Sandpoint, Idaho, had 4 ob-gyns on staff who treated patients from multiple rural counties. That was before Idaho's near total abortion ban went into effect almost 2 years ago, criminalizing most abortions. All 4 of Bonner's ob-gyns left by last summer, citing fears that the state's ban had exposed them to legal peril for doing their jobs. You know, if a woman comes in and she needs an emergency abortion, you go to the ob-gyn, the labor delivery department to do that. There's nobody there anymore. They shut down that entire department. Women have to go like 100 miles away to another hospital, or I believe actually the nearest one was like 40 some odd miles, if I'm remembering the article right. Now you've got that. Then you got JD Vance and Ted Cruz both demanding of Javier Becerra that he undo the rule that says that police can't just walk into a doctor's office and demand the menstrual records of young women so that they can see if they've missed a period and might be pregnant, and then, get their period back a few months later, and it's like, oh, that woman got an abortion, so we can go investigate her. This was JD Vance's latest little shtick. And then Trump is tripling down on his basically big lie strategy for attacking female politicians and Democrats. He said this yesterday of Kamala Harris, quote, "She's so radical, she wants abortions in the 8th and 9th month of pregnancy. That's fine with her, right up until birth and even after birth. The execution of a baby, because that's not abortion, that's the execution of a baby." It's just a lie. It's just a naked lie. And Republicans keep repeating this, and where this came from, what Republicans are pointing to is that the Democratic governor of Virginia years ago was Ralph Northam, and he was an obstetrician. He was a physician and obstetrician gynecologist in his previous lifetime, before he became a politician. And somebody once asked him about women who are giving birth to deformed babies, to babies that are going to die, where they didn't realize that this baby had a severe mutation or was going to be born without a brain or whatever, and they give birth and then they realize that, and what do you do? And Ralph Northam said, you deliver the baby and you try to make it as comfortable as possible, and then you wait for it to die. And you try to give it, it and the mother a lot of love and support. I mean, you can go back and look up the quote. I'm not reading the quote verbatim, but essentially that's what he said. He didn't say you kill the baby. He said you wait for it to die. And that became this Republican meme of Democrats want abortion even after a baby is born. I mean, this is how sick and twisted and weird, just absolutely weird, these people are in this, insane obsession about this. And I mean, and it's really part of a larger Republican worldview. And that larger Republican worldview is that they don't want women in the workplace. They don't want women in politics. That's why there are more than twice as many Democrats who are women in the House and the Senate as there are Republicans who are women. And I would guess that if you were to survey women in business, you would probably find that a lot more successful women in business are Democrats than Republicans. One successful woman in business, Carly Fiorina, was the CEO of a company in the Fortune Top 20, one of the 20 largest companies in America, Hewlett-Packard at the time, HP. She oversaw the largest tech merger in history. So what did Donald Trump have to say about this extraordinarily successful woman back in 2016 when she ran in the Republican primary? He called her horseface. He pointed out her looks. And, she's actually an attractive woman, but that's what men like Donald Trump do with successful women. They attack their looks. This week, JD Vance claimed that Kamala Harris has done, all she's done in her life is, quote, collect a government check. He said, I was in the Marines. All you've done is collect a government check. Well, wait a minute. In the Marines, you collect a government check. Anyhow, he erased her entire career, as an extraordinary district attorney, as an attorney general, as vice president of the United States. Trump last week called Harris dumb as a rock. That's also what he called Letitia James. It's also what he called Alvin Bragg. This is what Donald Trump characterizes black people, dumb as a rock. Marjorie Taylor Greene called her a DEI hire. probably referring to her race rather than just her being female. The Republican National Committee posted a sexist attack on X, saying Kamala Harris brought back her cackle to Milwaukee. Right. Attack a woman's laugh. Women are not allowed to laugh in America. You get that? I mean, you know, have you ever seen Donald Trump laugh, by the way? He doesn't. He literally has no sense of humor. He doesn't know how to tell a joke. He doesn't know how to take a joke. He doesn't know how to laugh. This man is weird. And then, of course, Fox News' Tommy Lahren saying, tweeting, Kamala, did you fight for ideals or did you sleep your way to the top with Willie Brown? This is a favorite Republican slur against successful women. How dare you date a powerful man at the same time you hold a powerful position? It's nuts. But this is the Republican plan. They will not be happy until America's women are barefoot, pregnant, and silent. They love to quote, Timothy, 1:14, as I recall? 1 Corinthians 14. Women should remain silent. They are not allowed to speak, must be in submission. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's right there in the Bible. Just ask any right-wing preacher. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Michael in Vancouver. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Can you hear me?
I beg your pardon?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've been thinking that Trump has succeeded in rebranding the Republican Party, the Republican Party, changing an E to an A. And it's a simple thing. I was wondering what women could do to vandalize, if we quit playing nice, to vandalize Trump's stuff. And the easy thing is to change that letter on the party designation from an E to an A.
So like think? The Republican Party? Yeah, yes. Well, it's so weird that this judge yesterday let Donald Trump's lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos go forward for asking, Nancy Mace in an interview on ABC News of why she continued to support Trump after he had been found liable for rape. Anyhow, it sure looks like he was. Michael, I get it. That's a good one. Thank you very much. JP in Bozeman, Montana. Hey, JP, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm calling just because I keep on hearing these different suggestions for Kamala's VP pick, and it concerns me when people are mentioning Shapiro and Kelly and these folks who have endorsed the Netanyahu's policies in Israel, because Kamala has just gained the youth enthusiasm, the base. I'm ADHD, and
we're all going to work on this for a while, JP. I mispronounced your name this morning too, but yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Don't you think that they will have to change their policies? I mean, she really kind of took the bark off Netanyahu yesterday in her press conference.
Nobody's going to be enthused by the possibility of someone who's held these beliefs their entire lives might change their policies because they're the VP of, somebody else. I mean, Kamala. Didn't. Kamala.
Say comma, JP. Say comma.
I know. I think comma. And then I pronounce Kamala.
No, I know. It's especially with Trump saying it constantly. So who's your alternative if you don't like Kelly and Shapiro?
Well, I think Bashir and Waltz. Waltz is
Tim Waltz, the governor of Minnesota.
Yep, exactly. Who doesn't get too much. You can always tell the good ones because they're the ones that are getting the least press.
Isn't he an older guy, though? I mean, you want somebody who 8 years from now will be able to run for president. I frankly don't know how old Tim Waltz is. I had assumed he was in his 60s, but I could be totally wrong.
Right. I'm just interested in somebody that's not going to put the kibosh on the enthusiasm that we have right now.
Yeah.
And my other question, so much of what I know about Israel is from listening to the Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Right.
And he's had Elon Poppy and
Sam's good on this, and Sam is Jewish. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish voices who are speaking out against Netanyahu. Thank God. JP, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Supreme Court is or at least the Republicans on the Supreme Court are completely out of control. I wrote an op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com titled "From Oaths to Lies: The GOP's Supreme Court Coup." And they gave king-like powers to the president to break the law and have immunity from prosecution as long as he calls it an official act. I mean, that's literally rewriting Article 2 of the Constitution from 1789. They signed the death warrant for agencies that protect our air, water, food, drugs, and workplace. That dates back to 1887 when the Interstate Commerce Commission was created. They gutted the 14th Amendment's requirement put into place in 1868 that no person who's engaged in an insurrection or rebellion can hold public office. They rewrote the National Firearms Act of 1934 to allow AR-15s with a bump stock to become fully automatic weapons. It's nuts. It goes on from there. You can read the whole piece at HartmannReport.com. But Congress really needs to hold this Supreme Court to account. Check it out.
Hey, Republicans, can you hear the cries of newborns lost under your skies? You promised change, but at what cost? Now we count the lives you've lost. In red states, the bans took hold. Doctors scared, their hands so cold. Women suffered, barely survived, while your policies, they thrive. Hey, Republicans, where have all the babies gone? In your war on women, something's gone so wrong. From Roe v. Wade to Dobbs' cruel fate, you've turned our future into a state of hate.
Welcome back. So, hey, Republicans, where have all the babies gone? That is the title of my op-ed today, by the way. Donald Trump is reportedly backing out of his scheduled September debate with Kamala Harris. Damn, now I'm doing it. I had a caller who was constantly mispronouncing. Anyhow, he's using nasty nicknames and stuff like that. He said there's a strong. This is what he posted on his Nazi-infested social media site. He said there's a strong sense by many in the Democrat Party. Isn't this weird? There is no such thing as a Democrat Party. Thomas Jefferson named it the Democratic Republican Party, and in the 1820s they dropped Republican from the name. And that got picked up in 1856 by the brand new Republican Party, which replaced the Whigs. So Thomas Jefferson named the Democratic Party, and it's always been the Democratic Party. But in 1956, Joe McCarthy said, Democratic Party sounds too nice, it sounds too friendly, it sounds too democratic. So never call it the Democratic Party, call it the Democrat Party with an emphasis on the rat. Look it up. That is Joe McCarthy's, and Republicans have been doing it ever since. Fox News, they constantly refer to this party that doesn't exist, this mythical party, the Democrat Party, and here it is, Trump doing the same thing. It's a slur. I mean, if we called them the Rape-Publican Party, they'd get all insane and upset and whatnot. But anyway, he says there's a strong sense by many in the Democrat Party, namely Barack Hussein Obama, that Kamala Harris is a Marxist fraud who cannot beat President Trump, and they are still holding out for someone better. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to schedule things with Harris because Democrats could very well still change their minds. All right. Well, the debate's scheduled for September 10th. That's after the Democratic Party convention. So, clearly this is just BS. Good news, President Biden has announced a new nominee for the Postal Board of Governors, Val Demmings, the former congresswoman from Florida. Does that recall? Yeah. She's a good person, Val Butler Demmings. He also nominated William Zollars, who's a Republican who has already said that he's going to support DeJoy. This is a guy who's also been on the board of a whole bunch of different organizations. Also, Barack and Michelle Obama endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Kamala Harris, there you go, saying it right now. Harris for president. This was today in a video announcing their joint phone call. And Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut says this new audio that was just released yesterday of JD Vance saying that women crossing state lines to obtain abortions requires a federal response. The federal government should intervene to stop women from crossing state lines to get abortions. He said, if that happens, he said, let's say Roe v. Wade is overturned, Ohio bans abortion, George Soros sends a 747 to Columbus to load up disproportionately black women to have abortions in California. And of course, the left will celebrate that. Kind of creepy, right? So if it happens, do you need some federal response to prevent it from happening? I'm pretty actually sympathetic to that, actually. Right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And what the hell, George Soros? 27 minutes past the hour. What's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls right after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. No topics off the table.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
By the soft moonlight, a chorus of pods and hearts so bright. We gather around, our voices strong, singing for justice all night long. And ladies from Kamala, we stand tall. With our feline friends, we answer the call. And every needle and every pearl, we see a future bright and sure. With whiskers twitching and tails held high, we won't be silenced. We'll
It's
never
Cat Ladies for Kamala.
For every woman, for every girl, we're fighting for a better world. Cat Ladies for Kamala, we stand tall.
Cat Ladies for Kamala. I love it. Wait until the male dogs come out and for Kamala. Amazing. Bob in Rome, Nevada, picking up your calls here. It's Anything Goes Friday. Bob in Rome, New York. Yeah. What's up, Bob?
New York. Tom, I'm calling today about DEI. Republicans are using DEI as a slur.
Yeah.
And I'm calling in defense of DEI for two related points. First, Kamala Harris was chosen as the DEI candidate for VP, both because as a DEI candidate, she was fully qualified for the job. And second, because she was a black woman, two constituencies important to Biden's election and our nation. DEI is good for everybody, and I don't think we should back away from it. Now, the second point is the dead-name Shillbilly running for VP said in his book that he couldn't afford to go to Yale without the college's largesse. They paid the full first year of his college, and I'll bet you that he used DEI reasoning on his application.
Yes, I am a poor, downtrodden minority from Appalachia. I get it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but Bob, let me, Nate, we've got a video clip of a woman who grew up in Appalachia, has spent 40 some odd years of her life in Appalachia, and has some thoughts on DEI, and a white woman, and just want to share it with you, Bob, since you brought this up. Here it is.
Okay, listen to me. As for me and mine, we are going to serve the Lord, and we are going to choose the DEI candidate and the DEI hire at every opportunity. And here is why. I have lived on this planet as a white woman in Appalachia all 44 years of it. And I've also had the good sense, maybe it's the Appalachian in me, I don't know, to keep my mouth shut and my ears open when my black and brown friends and family are talking. And here is what I've learned through my own life experience and having the benefit of listening and absorbing the life experiences of other people. I have seen far too many mediocre white men wearing loafers without socks and failing upwards, okay? Getting jobs because of who their daddy knows. Getting elected to Congress because of their white face and their lack of qualifications, Tim Burchett. And so I do recognize that the Conservative Party is trying to start using DEI as a buzzword instead of the word they really want to say. But all I hear is twice as exceptional. Because for black and brown people, they don't get to fail upwards. They don't get to be hired because of who their daddy knows. They don't get second chances, and they don't get the benefit of the doubt. So they have to be twice as exceptional to even get a passing glance at their resume. They have to be twice as qualified. So when I hear DEI, I hear twice as qualified.
There you go. What do you think, Bob?
I agree with that. I sympathize, but DEI is not just about race.
Oh, I know. In fact, white women are the principal beneficiaries of DEI programs.
Yeah. Tom, I'll just close with...
But white women, even white women also face these same or similar obstacles. Obviously not the same, and it's nowhere near as bad as for black women and black people in general. But yeah. Anyhow, back to you, Bob.
I think I want to close with bootstrapping is a myth, and DEI just provides people opportunities. The Shillbilly did not pull himself up by his bootstraps. And let's not fall into the idea that DEI is in any way disreputable.
Yeah, and his real name is James Donald Bowman. That's and yeah, Bob, thanks a lot for the call. Dee in Seattle. Hey, Dee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. On Democracy Now!, she was interviewing Jeremy Scahill last week. Mm-hmm. I guess he left the Intercept for drop site.
Yeah.
He was talking about articles on the record with Hamas, but they were discussing how the U.S. had given credible intelligence to Israel before the October attack.
Yes.
To prepare ahead of time.
This is well known. You don't need Jeremy Scahill for that. That was in the New York Times.
Oh, was it? Yeah. But they were also saying, not them, but on an earlier show, Israel had frozen Palestinian revenues since November 2023 and held it in escrow in Norway. Does that sound bizarre to you?
Well, no, it doesn't sound bizarre. They're doing it because they're saying that there's a connection between because Hamas was running Gaza, with money that Netanyahu gave them, ironically, and the Palestinian Authority, which is running the West Bank, was like on their side or something like that. But now, Bernie Sanders called this out the other day. Why did, and this is the question that Netanyahu refuses to answer, is why did, when he was warned weeks in advance that this attack was coming. Why did he not have any soldiers stationed near those gates or near those areas to protect those Jewish communities, number one? And number two, why did it take him 12 hours to get soldiers there when they were stationed just 30 miles away?
Yeah, and cameras with balloons, not the way to go at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there's something fishy here. And I don't want to go down some conspiracy rabbit hole. It might just be extraordinary levels of incompetence. But whatever it is, Netanyahu needs to answer for it and about it. Dee, thank you very much for the call. Spot on. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Well, I had a thought for you. I want your opinion on this. That even though that Republicans have Trump as their nominee, they're actually voting for the Heritage Foundation, and Trump is the front man who could be easily 25th, if you will, if he gets in, and JD Vance can become president, because he will become the face of whatever the Supreme Court and Heritage want.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and he has said as much in the past, although now he's trying to back away from them as more and more people are learning what is in Project 2025. At the top of the next hour, I've got just a bizarre story about the head of Project 2025, or the chief architect, the head of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts. Turns out he's a member of Opus Dei. Wild stuff. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Jay in Colo, Iowa. Hey, Jay, what's up?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on, Tom.
My pleasure.
The thing that I've been thinking about, and I've been super excited ever since Kamala was taking over the ticket, writing all kinds of hopium. The thing that I am getting anxious about is the recently announced lawsuits by the Heritage Foundation, the Republican Party, et cetera, trying to sue the Democratic Party for whatever is going on there. Now, a perfect analysis has been put up by a YouTube channel called Legal Eagle about how this is going to play down, and they say that the Republican Party and the Heritage Foundation has no standing in this case, but I have anxiety about that, and I just kind of wanted to see if you could get your thoughts. I'm no lawyer. I don't know your background in law, but
I am not an attorney.
What's kind of been going on?
Yeah, I am not an attorney. Jay, I know that the lawsuits have been filed. I don't know a great deal about them. I do follow a couple of legal blogs over on Substack. I agree with the argument that they have no standing. I think that they're frivolous. They've got a bunch of lawyers on staff in both those organizations, and they've got to find something for them to do. I mean, that would be one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is if they, by luck of the draw an Aileen Cannon type Republican judge, maybe that judge will gum up the works on their behalf. But I don't think anything's going to come out of this. So A, I wouldn't have anxiety about it. I would just wait to see what happens. And B, anxiety never helps anything.
That's true. That's true. But with Trump's last presidency and the way he stacked so many different courts, not just the Supreme Court, it's a possibility.
It is. It is a possibility that he could get an Aileen Cannon style, incompetent right wing, willing to do whatever the Republican Party wants judge. But even that, I think, would draw so much outrage. My guess would be that judge would back down. We'll see. We'll have to see. Jay, thanks for the call. Wang in Aberdeen, Washington. Hey, Wang, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Morning.
Morning.
First time calling.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
What's on your mind?
I listen to you every morning, and I end the day with Heather Cox Richardson. Pretty good company.
That's great. Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah, I'll say. But anyway, Tom, you've mentioned a number of times about these Christian nationalists, and I had a couple thoughts to relay to you. I wrote these down, so I'll read them. It says the religious followers of the MAGA cult are really a national anti-Christian movement. As Jesus suffered on the cross, he called out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The Bible warns that this is not true for those that know and believe in Jesus, but instead choose to follow the beast, the Antichrist, by taking his mark on the forehead
No, the Make America Great hat. No, I get what you're saying, Wang, and I would call it not an anti-Christian movement, but an anti-Jesus movement, because they've rebranded Christianity. Christianity is a label that, in fact, it uses a Greek word for Messiah that didn't even come into usage until long after Jesus was dead. But they are just regularly not just repudiating, but kind of spitting in the face of the Sermon on the Mount and Matthew 25, the most consequential and important things that Jesus said and taught. I'm with you. Wang, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'll be back with you in just a second.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Exposing the con in conservative. I'll be picking up your calls right after this. And welcome back. Tim in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good to talk to you again. It's been about a year, John. I've got an idea. Let me throw at you and see what you think.
Okay.
If Kamala takes all these video clips that we've got of Trump and the things he said and the things he lies about and has all of them there at the debate, if they ever have it, each time he opens his mouth, flip up on them things. And about the 6th or 7th, he'll be on his knees looking for the exit.
Yeah. All she has to have was she'd have to memorize what he said, because they don't allow you to have visual aids. But
whatever he says is going to be a lie.
I know. Well, 28 major lies, 44 total lies in his debate with Joe Biden. I think that this is why not the anticipation of the video clips, but he has backed out of the debate now. We haven't got an official letter, but we've got the equivalent of it on his social media site, and I just think he's afraid of her. There's like these memes going. I was on a couple of social media sites this morning because I was posting my daily take, and all over. I mean, on Threads, on Twitter, on Tribal, on a bunch of them. Are these pictures of Donald Trump in a chicken outfit, and the old SNL skit where he was doing Trump fried chicken and in a chicken costume in a yellow suit, and the guy is a coward. He's been a coward his whole entire life. He had to buy an X-ray of somebody who had bone spurs to get out of going to Vietnam. He's your generic coward. Tim, thank you. Well said. Lauren in Watertown, Wisconsin. Hey, Lauren, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I was just curious about that judge in Florida that dismissed that documents case.
Galen Canna?
Yeah, with Special Prosecutor Jack Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering why didn't they file that in D.C. instead of Florida? Because didn't they take the documents from D.C. in the first place?
Yeah, and therefore, if they were to refile, that would be a reasonable thing to do. I think that they felt that the majority of the criminal activity happened in Florida, which was the lying to the FBI, refusing to turn over the documents, hiding the documents, moving the documents from place to place in order to continue hiding them. Trump and his butler and his valet, and this third guy, the video guy, the pool video guy. And so my guess is that they figured, the majority of the actual serious criminal activity, because when Trump left the White House, when he shipped those documents out of the White House, that was in the hours before he turned the White House over to Joe Biden. So he was arguably still president. And you could argue that that was an official act under the terms of the Supreme Court decision. And even before the Supreme Court decision, you could argue that, he was doing that as president, and therefore, he had some right to possess those documents. Well, that right vanished at noon on January 20th, and apparently the documents were moved out, the day before. So by that time, the documents were down at Mar-a-Lago, or maybe some apparently went to Bedminster too. So I think that's why, Laura.
one other quick thing. When you asked about ever seeing Donald Trump laughing, I saw him laughing the day after he fired Comey, and he had the Russians in the White House.
Oh, yeah. There's that famous picture of that. Yeah, you're right.
Yep.
The only laugh, I think that's the only laugh I've ever seen him do was when he fired James Comey and he turned an American and Israeli spy over to the Russians. Amazing.
Thanks, Tom.
Laura, thank you. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
In the dawn's early light, we rise and stand, paws on the ground. United we band, we bark for justice.
We bark for justice?
We howl for truth.
Is this the dogs for Kamala?
We'll never lose. Move over, cats. We are the dogs for Kamala. With wagging tails and courage so strong. In every bark, in every howl, we see a future where we all belong.
So much for cat ladies.
City streets.
So much for the cats for Kamala. Oh, this is getting wild. The cat ladies for Kamala has just absolutely for Kamala has actually gone viral. I'm doing it myself. This is what happens. Has absolutely gone viral. It's just incredible. It's all over the. I mean, there's now a Facebook group, Cat Ladies for Kamala, and it's apparently got a lot of members. So, yeah, Louise, came up with these songs because she herself is a cat lady, and not a childless one, but we have 3 cats, and 2 of the 3 are very much hers. One of them sleeps with her every night. You couldn't pry that cat away from her. And, they follow her around like dogs. And anyway, I suspect there's a lot of cat people out there who love Kamala Harris. Christian in Bronx, New York. Hey, Christian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hang on. Let me turn off the.
It's fine. I can hear you just fine.
Thank you. Basically, I think Kamala should really strongly consider Pete Buttigieg as their VP running mate because he's brilliant, because he highly effectively and politely fillets all Republican arguments. And they're going to throw a lot of crap at this campaign. And I feel, even if she doesn't choose him, she needs to have him on the campaign trail, filleting the Republican arguments.
I'm with you, Christian. People say, a black woman is hard enough, and then you throw in a gay man and it's going to be over the top. Well, here's the thing. The same people who hate black women are the same people who hate gay men. And they're not going to vote for Kamala no matter who she picks. This idea that she's got to get some manly man, white guy with a wife and 3 kids kind of thing. I don't buy that. I believe that the Democratic base, first off, is just fine with a gay candidate. And especially, he's a family values guy. He's married. He's got 2 kids. So number one, the Democratic base is just fine with him. And I think the independents, which are going to decide the election, frankly, the independents in the middle are also fine with gay people. The attitudes towards gays and gay marriage and and the entire queer community, but particularly gay men and lesbian women, have really softened, I guess would be the right word, or changed since gay marriage was legalized, and started spreading across the states, and then got legalized in the Obergefell decision by the Supreme Court. So I would love to see him as VP. Yeah, he's from Indiana originally. He lives now in Michigan with Chastain, his husband. Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yep. Good talking to you, Christian. Thank you. Mark in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Mark, what's up?
I'd like to put in a word for Tim Walz. I don't know if you've looked up his background or not, but he ticks off a lot of things.
He's a great guy.
Number one, he is 60, so he's the same age as he turned 60 this year, or shortly. He might be turning 61, but anyway, he's 60.
So he'd only be 68 in 8 years, which is still pretty young, generally speaking.
Well, but my suggestion, and I think he would probably be willing to do it, would be that he would be vice president for 4 years, and in the second term be willing to step down for a younger person to step in as vice president.
I don't think that's necessary. Let
me give you some of his background. So,
okay, we just have about 20 seconds here. Oh no, wait a minute. I think we may have a minute. No, we don't.
Okay, he was born in a small town in Nebraska. Went to a small college, Chadron State in Nebraska, which is near the Black Hills. He got a degree in education. He was a junior high and high school teacher. He coached a football team that won the state championship in Minnesota. He's an Army Sergeant Major in the reserves.
Wow, that's a hell of a resume.
A lot of.
Yeah. No, thank you for educating me, Mark. I didn't know that much about Tim Walz, and sounds like a great guy. Mark, thank you for the call. And your vote is registered, as they say. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater white shirt and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is, the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color, As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. Kevin Roberts is the architect of Project 2025. He's the head of the Heritage Foundation. He's the guy who said that this will be the second American Revolution and it will be peaceful if the liberals or if the left allows it. In other words, they're willing to use violence. But it turns out that there's a little more to Kevin Roberts than we knew about. You've probably heard of Opus Dei, O-P-U-S-D-E-I. Opus Dei is a radical Catholic group. They're international. They are rabidly anti-abortion, anti-birth control. Women should have basically no power. No woman can be a priest. No woman can serve, in any position of power, real power in their organization, or frankly in the Catholic Church. And this is one of the most right-wing extremist groups. In fact, Pope John Paul II, the Pope who invited Louise and I to Italy to hang out with him for a little celebration. It was quite an event back in 1999. He was the guy who basically blessed them. And now Pope Francis, who is a lot more liberal, has cut back on some of their powers and authorities and whatnot. Excuse me. But it turns out that Kevin Roberts is a member of Opus Dei, this secretive radical Catholic group. They run something called the Catholic Information Center on K Street in Washington, D.C. It's headed by an Opus Dei priest. Kevin Roberts says he goes on a weekly basis for Mass and formation, formation is like religious guidance and teachings. One of his, this is over in The Guardian, Rachel Leingang wrote a great piece about this. The headline is Kevin Roberts, architect of Project 2025, has close ties to radical Catholic group Opus Dei. She notes, outlawing birth control is the hardest political battle facing conservatives in the future, the 50-year-old political strategist said. But he urged conservatives to pursue even small legislation. This is Kevin Roberts is the strategist she's talking about. But he urged conservatives to pursue even small legislative victories, what he called radical incrementalism, to advance these policies. One of the core tenets, she writes, of Opus Dei is that it does not believe in the traditional separation of church and state. Instead, a professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University, Massimio Fagioli, says, Opus Dei is part of a movement of U.S. conservative and traditionalist Catholicism that holds a view that the United States is the last bastion of Christendom, so that if the United States goes a certain way, so goes Christianity and Catholicism. Now, I'm old enough to remember 1960. Granted, I was 9 years old, but John Kennedy was attacked for being Catholic by Republicans. And the nature of the attacks, the way they went after him, was they said that the Pope would end up being in charge of America. And, I think it's reasonable to assert that that definitely did not happen. And in fact, John Kennedy gave a speech to the effect of, I will be an American president. I will be loyal to the Constitution, not to my Catholic religion and not to the Pope. I mean, he had to come right out and say it. I'm paraphrasing, but you can look it up. This speech is fairly easy to find. So this is, I think this gives us an insight into the motivations of Project 2025. Not that the entire document is a Catholic document. Much of the document reflects the desires of the fossil fuel industry, for example. More drill, baby, drill, and do away with the whole Green New Deal stuff. It reflects the interests of the big insurance companies. No Medicare for all. Make Medicare Advantage the default option for Medicare. That's in Project 2025. It reflects the interests of the big banks. They want to gut the regulatory agencies. It reflects the interests of big tech. It represents that, they want to dial back on antitrust efforts. Basically all of the major industries that love to pour money into the Republican Party, in addition to the hardcore Catholic anti-birth control groups, the hardcore Protestant evangelicals who want to end abortion, along with the Catholics who want to end abortion, and the apparent, and I didn't realize Opus Dei said, was of the opinion that the separation of church and state is wrong, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, the Catholic Church actually ruled large parts of the world for hundreds of years, for probably well over 1,000 years. So, yeah, the idea that the churches should be running politics probably makes perfect sense. But now we have a little better insight into this. Meanwhile, major parts of Project 2025 have already been enacted into law. This is rather troubling. Massive executive power was given to the president in the immunity decision of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is who is enacting these parts of Project 2025 into law. The regulatory state, Project 2025 calls for basically gutting the regulatory state. That process was begun when the Supreme Court knocked down the Chevron deference, saying that rather than agencies deciding the rules going forward about pollution and poison in our air and water and things like that, that judges get to decide these things, even if they have no scientific background. And this whole notion of racial purity, poisoning the blood of America, and family purity, who gets married and who gets to have kids, that seems to be coming down the road. Clarence Thomas has pointed out that in the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court, overturning Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court rejected the idea, which was put forth first in the Griswold decision in 1965 that legalized birth control. Most famously was put forward in 1973 in Roe v. Wade. This conclusion of the Supreme Court at that time that the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, all in aggregate create a right of privacy, a penumbra, a right of privacy that has multiple logical outcomes. That if you have the right to privacy, you have the right to have birth control in your home. If you have the right to privacy, you have the right to have an abortion. If you have the right to private and not have to get permission from the state. If you have the right to privacy, you have the right to marry a person of the same sex. This was Obergefell. If you have the right to privacy, you have the right to marry a person of a different race. That was the Loving versus Virginia case back in the 1960s. All of these cases, with the exception of Loving versus Virginia, probably because he's married to a white woman, Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion, in one of these recent opinions, it wasn't Dobbs, but it was one of the ones that followed, said, we have blown up this whole right to privacy rationale on which all of these other decisions are based. And we've only blown up one of those other decisions, Roe v. Wade. So let's go after Griswold. Let's undo the right to birth control. Let's go after Obergefell and undo the right to gay marriage. Let's go after Lawrence versus Texas and undo the right of gay people to have intimate relations with other gay people. Or I should say queer people, the entire LGBTQ plus community. And this is something we need to take very seriously. And I mean, yes, there are these calls to to prosecute Clarence Thomas and hold him accountable and all that. I think that we need to go beyond that. This court is out of control. This court is trying to turn America into a theocracy by with the cake bakers, right? Saying and the woman who had the website that she thought somebody one day might want her to design a website for gay marriage, even though nobody ever had. That therefore she had standing. I mean, and it was a religious shtick.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And then there was the coach who was, forcing his team, his high school team, to pray on the 50-yard line. I mean, all of these things. This is what the Supreme Court has brought us. They're trying to reverse America, essentially. Okay, welcome back. And Griffin in Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Griffin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was calling to talk about Kamala's potential VP pick, and I'd also like to relate to the conversation that you just had on the air. The reason why I think that she should select Roy Cooper is because Roy Cooper is an experienced leader who has experience winning over swing voters, which is going to be critical in this upcoming election cycle.
For people who don't know, Roy Cooper is the Democratic governor of North Carolina, which is by and large a red state. Yes, and he won the. Thank you. He won. He was governor. He won the election. He actually won re-election in 2020. He was first elected in 2016. He won both times, even when Trump carried the state, which demonstrates his ability to win over swing voters. And also, what he did is one of his biggest accomplishments was, do you remember back in 2016 when the NBA pulled the All-Star game out of Charlotte because then the governor, Pat McCrory, signed into law the transgender bathroom bill? I do. I remember it well.
Well, Pat McCrory,
who was the Republican governor at the time.
Yes, who was a Republican at the time. Then he was. Then Roy Cooper, by the skin of his teeth, unseated him in 2016, and Roy Cooper repealed that bill, and now businesses are going back to North Carolina. And the reason why winning swing voters over is so important is because I'd like to rely on the radical incrementalism that you talked about earlier, where the Heritage Foundation, JD Vance, and some of these far right are literally dragging us back to the Comstock era, where Anthony Comstock was going on these crusades and outlawing birth control and spreading this anti-abortion sentiment. That's the type of society that the far right wants to bring us back to. And in many ways, with the radical incrementalism and undermining these Supreme Court cases, we're already there. In fact, in Texas, an appellate court in Texas made a ruling that is inconsistent with the Supreme Court case, Carey v. Population Services International of 1977, where anyone of any age can access birth control, and it's unconstitutional to deny someone birth control as a right to privacy. Well, the state of Texas just ruled that that people under the age of 18 can be denied birth control, even on federal grounds, even in these Title X clinics.
Wow. So, if I can just speak to Roy Cooper for a minute, Griffin. The reason I'm pretty sure that he will not be picked is because he's 67 years old.
I mean, that is true.
Which would make him like 75 at the end of an 8-year term. And that's why I really think they're looking at the next generation, and they're trying to make their campaign all about the future, all about the next generation. So I'm guessing, Pete Buttigieg,
he'd be good.
Josh Shapiro.
I do like recently that Pete Buttigieg has been very critical of JD Vance, as he should.
Yeah, well, Pete polled number one among Democratic voters as their pick for VP in a recent poll. I believe it was the NPR Ipsos poll, but it was one of the big ones. I can't tell you for sure exactly which poll it was, but it just came out yesterday. And so
it's really the ability to win over swing voters.
Yeah,
that's going to be critical.
Yeah, I get it, and that's where people are a little worried about a gay guy, But I'm telling you, America is far more tolerant than it was just even a decade ago. Griffin, thank you for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out.
We share our hopes, we share our dreams. In this talk show world, we're on the same team. From every station, coast to coast, it's our opinions that matter most. On the airwaves, I'm calling in.
Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Police in Texas have tried to arrest a librarian for a civil rights book. This is pretty amazing. There's a little bit of body cam footage that has kind of leaked out into the internet, and here it is.
Essentially, the librarians are my suspects. If they're the ones that are choosing the books and putting them in there, they're the ones that are carrying the criminal liability. I'm not sure that all the books will necessarily fit the statutory requirement, but I'm doing a criminal investigation into some of your staff. You're the librarian, correct? What I'm doing is not an administrative investigation, so I cannot compel you to talk to me. Obviously, there's been an allegation of books that were in conflict of the penal code in the library, and so that's what I'm looking into.
I mean, this is what's going on in Texas right now. Police are showing up at libraries. And the book in question was by Toni Morrison. The Blue Eye book. I mean, this is crazy. He tried to interview the librarians without an attorney. There were three librarians that he talked to. All three of them refused to talk to him without an attorney. As you just heard, he said this is a criminal investigation. This was the result of a 2-year investigation. They produced an 824-page investigative file. And this was, again, for checking out one of Toni Morrison's books, for God's sake. And, these librarians are courageous. I mean, standing up to the cops for 2 years and just saying, no, we're not going to go along. What's happening in Texas right now is what Republicans have in mind for the rest of America. And this is serious stuff, and we need to take it seriously. We need to understand that this is not some. They're not just harassing librarians. They're not just going to school board meetings and whining and complaining. In Texas, they have passed laws. It's a crime now in Texas for librarians to pass out certain books, and the guidelines are so vague that books that make people feel bad about race are illegal. Books that talk about gay characters or that even reference a gay character or a queer character of any kind are illegal. And police officers are marching into libraries. I mean, it's just, Nate, can you play that video again? This is just chilling. Just if you could pop it up and play it again.
Essentially, the librarians are my suspects.
Yeah, put it on the.
If they're the ones that are choosing the books and putting them in there, they're the ones that are carrying the criminal liability. I'm not sure that all the books will necessarily fit the statutory requirement, but I'm doing a criminal investigation into some of your staff. You're the librarian, correct? What I'm doing is not an administrative investigation, so I cannot compel you to talk to me. Obviously, there's been an allegation of books that were in conflict of the penal code in the library, and so that's what I'm looking into.
This is where the Nazis started. You know, 2 weeks after Hitler was made chancellor in 1933, they had the first book burning. And it was all books about, you know, investigations or research, scientific research into being gay, being lesbian, being transgender. It was from, I'm sorry, I don't recall the name of the institute, but it was this institute in Berlin that was world famous for doing work, particularly on transgenderism. And they hauled away the guy who ran it, who was a physician. And they took all the books from this research center out into the street and piled them up in a giant pile, poured gasoline on them, and lit them on fire. That's that famous book-burning bonfire that everybody's seen the picture of. That's that famous picture. That was 2 weeks, as I recall. I mean, fact check me on this, but it was very, very soon after Adolf Hitler was made Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Maybe 3 weeks, I don't know. But it was very, very shortly thereafter. First, you know, it's not, as Pastor Niemöller said, it's not necessarily first they come for the trade unionists. It's first they come for the communists, or first they come for the socialists. First they come for the books. First they come for the librarians. First they come for the teachers. And we've got these neo-fascist groups out here who are, you know, promoting this stuff. They're all over social media. They show up at public libraries. They're on Fox and other right-wing media constantly. Oh yes, we are in favor of liberty. We're just, you know, friendly moms. We're just, you know, suburban people. We just care about our children. This is fascism. There's no other word to describe it. I'll be right back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned. That was May 10th, 1933, when that book burning happened, but I just told you about it.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out.
Turn the dial, tune in, and you'll find a voice of reason for the open mind. On Lefty Talk Radio, we speak the truth about the American dream for me and you. Lefty Talk Radio, where dreams are alive. A fair wage, raising a family we strive. Taking a vacation with dignity in hand. This is our vision for every woman and man.
I'm not sure I'd call it salvation. Anyway, welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. I got, a couple of days ago, I started kind of coughing and wheezing here on the air, and I had a horrible sore throat. Yesterday, no, it was 2 days ago, Wednesday, I guess it started on Tuesday. And Wednesday, I was really raw. And I took a COVID test, in fact. Got a PCR test. It was negative. So it's just some kind of, common cold. and or whatever, or maybe the remnants of COVID that I had last month. But then Sean said, I've got some honey in the back room. You should try this. And I thought, I don't know. And so, but anyhow, I took a teaspoon of her honey, and boom, my throat stopped hurting. Now it started hurting again after about an hour, and my voice went away again. And I've been getting better day by day. But then that occurred to me. I remember a formula that this old herbalist, Dr. Christopher, taught Louise and I back in East Lansing when he was a traveling herbal teacher. And he came to MSU, and he was doing this whole song and dance, and we became his students, and we really got into herbology for a while. And his thing was you take equal amounts of fresh squeezed lemon juice and honey, and then you take an entire, about a quarter of a cup of each, and then you take an entire bulb of garlic and run it through a garlic press and crush it up really fine, and you stir all that stuff together, and you end up with this lemon honey garlic mix, which is really potent. And I'm telling you, it is knocking this cold out. So just, for future reference. Anyhow, Paul in Elmhurst, Illinois. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, this is kind of like humorous but serious in the sense of you had the Proud Boys, and Trump said, stand by and stand up and stand by, whatever they said. And then you had the march in Charlotte, and, the Jews will not replace us.
Right.
Well, I don't get, how come the white supremacists are now supporting the Jewish part of the equation? I don't get that part. Like, when they turn around and say Jews will not replace us, but yet Trump and the MAGA support the Jewish war in Israel and Gaza.
I don't think it's appropriate to call him a whore. It's pretty severe.
I'm sorry, I did not call him that. That was
I would call him a war criminal. I mean, let's call him, rather than using slurs that are typically used against women, let's just call him what he is. He's a war criminal.
Tom, that was my accent you heard. I didn't call him that, to be honest now.
Oh, okay.
It was just whatever that come out. So, okay. But anyway, do you see my point? They support the white supremacists, but yet they support the Jewish cause as well.
Yeah, well, it's not a Jewish cause. I mean, I support the Jewish cause. I support the Jewish state. Netanyahu is doing serious damage to Israel all around the world, and domestically as well. Right. He's got a huge anti-Netanyahu movement. His approval ratings are under 20% in Israel right now. He's extending this war. He's carrying on this war just to keep himself from going to jail. The guy has been indicted for fraud, for taking bribes, for all kinds of horrible things. Israel's going to have to deal with this thing themselves, but I think that we need to be cutting off military aid to them until it happens. Paul, thank you for the call. Tommy in Oxford, Alabama. Hey, Tommy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, for the record, my wife and I are childless cat people.
Okay. There you go.
Anyway, you talked before. I run a veterans support site. But I want to talk about the 2025 agenda for veterans, and what they're basically trying to do is take away everybody's benefits except combat.
Except what? You faded out there.
Except if you were a combat veteran.
Oh, okay.
So, and I don't think anybody knows about it. My father-in-law sent me a text the other day that I think he got off Facebook, where they're trying to blame it all on Kamala Harris.
Oh, that's weird.
Which was a new one that I hadn't heard.
Trump cut some veterans benefits when he was president. I don't recall what they were specifically, but
he now to his credit, he started something called the White House Veterans Hotline, which has been pretty effective. And I give him credit for that. And there were something else he did I don't remember, but he did do a few things for the veterans. But this agenda that is just, how whacked it is. I mean, Social Security, VA.
Well, you've got to, the one interest group that I failed to mention when I was going through all the various groups that had input into Project 2025 was right-wing billionaires who don't want to pay income taxes. And so they're just in favor of cutting every government program there is, so there's no longer a rationale for income taxes. And, they generally call themselves libertarians or tech bros or whatever. And it's a very toxic mix. Tommy, thanks for the report on the veterans.
Hey, give me 1 second. I'll read you something. Sure. I'm fixing to pull over here. So be enough out of the way. This is what he sent me in a message. It says, comments from Kamala Harris regarding VA facilities. Quote, the United States government cannot continue to pay for every need of what has become a special class citizen. Veterans are equal to us, but not better than us. Veterans Affairs...
That, you can stop right there, Tommy. That is not anything that ever came out of Kamala Harris. The language
absolutely
is dismissive. I mean, that's definitely not the kind of thing that any Democrat would write. It's just what you're reading there is propaganda. Probably came out of Moscow.
And that's what I thought too. There's a Rutgers report that actually takes it back to the original thing in Virginia or something years ago. They're just pulling stuff off, old stuff off the internet and then rewriting it.
Yeah.
But I really would like all the veterans to understand, because we don't post anything political on our site.
No, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been 100% supportive of America's veterans. In fact, Joe Biden is probably, his son was a veteran and he died from exposure to a burn pit in Iraq. Biden and Harris have probably been the most pro-veteran administration since Harry Truman and Franklin Roosevelt. I get it. Tommy, thanks for the flag on that. Thanks for alerting us. Jeff in Berkeley, Michigan. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. I wanted to share a story that could hopefully be an example of how we can kind of reintroduce all of our friends and family that are in the middle to Kamala Harris and try to support for Kamala Harris, for Kamala Harris. And certainly, I had actually been with my mother and my brother when Joe Biden stepped down. And so the conversation came up, and my mother is a staunch Reagan Republican, constantly listens and watches to Fox News and right-wing radio. But she was open to the idea and just had the, do you think that Kamala is competent? Obviously coming from some preconceived notions that she had. And looking at her and saying, yes, I absolutely do think she is. I talked about how she was, a former DA and a former AG. And those are things that she didn't know. And those are things that she seemed to pause and think twice on.
Yeah.
So I think, those are certainly things that we can do. We can reintroduce and have that be a way that people can get to know our current vice president and hopefully future president.
Well, good on you, Jeff, for talking to your relatives about Kamala Harris and about, the Democratic agenda and all the accomplishments. I mean, if you just look at some of the accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration, we now have the strongest economy in the world, literally. We have the lowest inflation rate in the world right now. They created 16 million new jobs. Wages are up. Their wages are actually going up faster than inflation. Inflation is down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in decades. We've had historic infrastructure investments. They lowered prescription drug costs, the record health insurance coverage, the smallest number of Americans who don't have health insurance in history, and those are all in red states where they refuse to expand Medicaid. The most significant climate law in history, one of the most significant in the world, the first major gun safety law in 31 years. They put the first black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court, and she's just doing a spectacular job. They provided help for over 1 million veterans who were exposed to toxins like Joe Biden's son was. The violent crime rate in the United States right now is at the lowest it's been in 50 years. 50 years. And border crossings right now are lower than when Donald Trump left office. So, there you go. Jeff, I gotta move along, but thank you for the call. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, what's up?
I have a VP candidate for you that I'm surprised I'm not hearing anything about it, and that's Julian Castro from Texas.
Now, two people yesterday suggested him.
I missed the program yesterday. I'm sorry.
There you go. But he's a great guy. And he would bring the Hispanic vote.
He checks a lot of boxes, I think. 3 states that are critical, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. He can blunt the numbers. We won't win in Florida or Texas, but he can blunt the numbers there. Yeah. And 2 other more important things. He's 50. And he's not in a current public office, so
what is he doing right now? I mean, he was in the cabinet of Obama, right?
Yes, yeah, and he ran very briefly in 2020, and of course didn't attract the numbers. And he's been in private practice, and he's also connected with the Center for American Progress, the John Podesta organization.
Right.
So,
right. So he's
kind of stayed
now?
involved in community things. Yes, he's an attorney. But he's been vetted nationally, and he's had national exposure as part of Obama's cabinet. So there's that to consider as well, and I think most especially his age, 50.
Yeah. No, I think he would be a great choice. I don't think there's any bad choices right now. I have not heard a single name that I wouldn't be enthusiastic
I'd vote for any
about.
of them in my sleep.
There you go. Israel, thank you for the call. Apparently we'll know by August 7th. I had figured we'd know by today, but hey, the suspense is great.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
You know, Trump dragged it out right up to the Republican convention just to keep speculation going and keep his name in the headlines. Not a bad idea. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Diana in Carson City, Nevada. Hey, Diana, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I was just calling about the trouble that people are having pronouncing Kamala's name with a suggestion. Maybe we should just refer to her as Harris. We do that with most male candidates. I'm not sure why we don't do that with female candidates, and it would solve that problem.
Well, there's also there was some blowback to people on Fox News. This was yesterday, actually, just using her first name and not using her last name and not referring to her as Vice President Harris or anything like that. And what the rebuttal to that blowback was that she has branded herself now. She is branding herself, and her campaign is now branding her as Kamala. They're just using that one word.
Too.
And so if that's her brand, then we just need to learn how to pronounce her name correctly, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't realize that. So, yeah. Okay, well, then that's moot.
There you go.
That's a moot point.
Well, it was a good thought, Diana. Diana, thank you. Thanks for the call. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Just want to talk about how Vladimir Putin hoists himself on his own petard, as it were, which is an old phrase that means like someone who's planting a bomb and it blows them up.
Yeah.
There was an Ipsos Reuters poll out Wednesday, reported by Newsweek, which showed by a margin of 53% to 43% that Americans think Trump's too old to work in government. I don't know the details of the question they asked, but you sort of get the idea. Yeah. Meanwhile, the whole betting on the basis of Putin has been that to avoid being confronted in Ukraine, he has to get our president out of the way. And so there was a very big campaign undermining the idea of Mr. Biden's sanity, including there was a brief little attempt at a fake talk show at a non-commercial outlet, broadcasting outlet in the West Coast, and they had this former member of the British Parliament running this
George
thing,
Galloway?
And that's the man.
Yeah,
and his
he's a Putin stooge.
Yeah, and he was admitted that he was pro-Russian, but he didn't manage to come up with any reason for it. Yeah. So that was sort of not too good on the sniff test. Anyway, there was a couple of weeks back at the G7, there was an incident where presumably Joe Biden was talking to nobody at all. And this Mr. Galloway described the whole thing in great detail. The next day, however, on France 24, which is like the French version of BBC, they have a regular feature called Fake or Real, where they take hits from the internet and analyze them to see if they're actual or not. And there was the incident of the G7, and what you couldn't see in the incident that was got millions of hits on a Russia-friendly station was that the point where he's talking to nobody, there actually was, if you see the other angle, a skydiver just parafoiled in.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw the debunking. I've seen it on the internet. Yeah, I'm with you, Mike. No, it's really sad. I mean, and I'm seeing this on supposedly left-wing stations, and they're all getting Russia. Many of them are getting Russia-friendly. It's terrible. Thank you, Mike. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com.
I'm here on the airwaves, ready for the fight. I'm challenging the voices that think they know what's right. You call me liberal, I wear it like a crown. I dare you to come forward, don't you back down. Coming to my show, bring your
52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So I wanted to talk about librarians and the library, and I just want to preface this by saying that of all the people in society, I really have the highest regard for librarians, and I really felt like they were the bulwark against authoritarianism and held our civil rights up, protected them.
Remember when George W. Bush was investigating librarians in 2003? And
I don't remember that. And so he was investigating his own wife?
Yeah, actually, I guess so. But they had this whole thing about, they thought that libraries and librarians might have been some sort of vector point for terrorism, as I recall. I don't recall all the details. I just remember.
Well, I remember at 9/11 when libraries were the epicenter of warrantless searches, right. And it was the librarians that were protecting us.
That's right.
These searches.
That's right. And they were putting up signs saying that your activity at this library might be monitored by the police and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, I was very disturbed about the investigation you mentioned. I wanted to relate a personal experience that happened recently at the Multnomah County Central Library with me. I had come there and happened on a talk that was being given by outgoing District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Mm-hmm. And I was invited to attend, and I thought, well, this is interesting. And I came in and began to video the event. And it was a big public room and, just moderate amount of people. Within 30 seconds, I had 3 people come up and try to throw me out for videoing the event. And one of them was a librarian. Uh-huh. And she was accusing me of causing a disturbance. And I said, well, no, you're causing the disturbance. And I said, I know my rights, and I'm a journalist, and I have a weekly half-hour program that reaches 400,000 people. Mm-hmm. And if you want, you can call the police and have me thrown out. And at which point she left, and I listened to the information, which I found very interesting, mm-hmm. tried to ask a question, wasn't called on by the host of the event, so I finally just forced the issue a bit. And I asked Mike Schmidt there, I said, I wanted to ask another question, but I said, well, is what I'm doing illegal? Isn't it a constitutionally protected activity under the First Amendment? And he kind of smiled and sheepishly said, "You're not doing anything criminal." And I'm glad he was there because, the librarians could very well have called the police and thrown me out and trampled my civil rights. And by the way, one of the most interesting things that Mike Schmidt said was that he had to throw out many cases because of a Fourth Amendment violations by the police in Portland. So that's
Fourth Amendment is privacy rights, FYI.
Privacy, well, searches and seizures, illegal searches and seizures mostly.
Yeah, I should add, for people who don't know who we're talking about here, Mike Schmidt was basically replaced by a far more conservative district attorney this time. A lot of it had to do with homeless issues and things like that, but he was our outgoing DA.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of legitimate criticism against him, I think, from both sides, but it's a tough job.
And the event was being actually videotaped on the security cameras, and I did a public records request and got a copy of that video. So, but the whole tenor of the libraries have changed. The Central Library just had undergone a renovation, and it's a strange place. They got rid of maybe a third of their books. They cut down the height of the bookcases by a third so they can have a clear line of sight, all for security. Mm-hmm. They've taken private areas and, in an odd way, made them public. Now the main bathroom on the main floor has a big glass door where you can see inside, so you can see people coming in and out of the stalls and washing their hands.
My guess is that was because homeless people were making use of public spaces like libraries. And you can't simply say you can't come in because you're homeless.
And they've made renovations to accommodate a great deal of that. Yeah. But the point is that librarians are turning into bouncers, and they're becoming increasingly ignorant, and they're trampling our constitutional rights as well.
Huh. Well, I'm sorry you had a bad experience there, Jonathan. I still think librarians are doing noble work, but I get it. Thanks a lot for the call. Wow. We'll be back on the other side of the break. How the Proud Boys are preparing for a second Trump term, and Jezebel? Really? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
As a writer,
in addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016.
At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. "It's too weird here," she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, "Madam President." We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs." And the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown. And for a moment, I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to Hour 3 of the Thom Hartmann Program. That's me with you. And the Proud Boys are back. Aaron Roston writing over at Reuters. This is a long, complex article, and I'm not going to go through it all with you. But his summary is the Proud Boys are back. I mean, as the headline says, he says, since the January 6th Capitol riot, 4 former Proud Boys have been convicted in federal court of seditious conspiracy, each sentenced to 15 or more years in prison. At least another 70 members were charged with participating in the violence. But that crackdown has not stopped the Proud Boys. After last Thursday's historic verdict against Trump, an Ohio Proud Boys chapter vowed war. This article must be a month old or so. An Ohio Proud Boys chapter vowed war and posted a video of Proud Boys street brawls that ended with the message, "Fighting solves everything." A Miami chapter said, "Now more than ever, we are recruiting." One Proud Boy told Reuters that America is in a period of calm before the storm. And dozens of Proud Boys, some in body armor and helmets, marked the 3rd anniversary of the January 6th insurrection with a show of force at the State House in Columbus, Ohio. On April 20th, nearly a dozen that would be Hitler's birthday, nearly a dozen gathered for a rally at Trump's Republican campaign in Wilmington, North Carolina. More recently, groups of Proud Boys from 2 chapters mixed with tens of thousands of Trump supporters in Wildwood, New Jersey in May. And Trump himself has not ruled out the possibility of political violence this fall. He said, if we don't win, it depends, when he was asked by Time magazine if he expected violence. He said, if I'm jailed or put under house arrest, I'm not sure the public would stand for it. At a certain point, there's a breaking point. So, be aware. The violent prone are still with us and still active, and in fact, trying to grow their ranks. Meanwhile, the attacks against Kamala Harris are coming fast and furious. New Republic has written, Melissa Gira Grant just wrote a brilliant piece. It's titled "The Violent Implications of the Jezebel Attacks on Kamala Harris." And, for example, Kellyanne Conway on Sunday on Fox So-Called News said, she does not speak well. She does not work hard. Now, these are 2 classic slurs thrown against black people. The way that they speak and that they're, quote, lazy. This JD Vance went with that same lazy trope, suggesting that Harris was basically a welfare queen. He said, what the hell have you done other than collect a government check for the past 20 years? At a campaign rally earlier this week. It was on Monday of this week. But the most horrifying attack, Melissa Grant points out, was launched by a fellow by the name of Lance Wallnau. Lance is one of the major voices in the Christian nationalist movement, a big supporter of Trump. He's met with Trump. And he also helped mobilize people for the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th. And he's a leading prophet in what's called the New Apostolic Reformation, which is this Protestant group that wants to turn America into a theocracy. And he said on Monday that Kamala Harris, quote, represents the spirit of Jezebel, and in a way that'll be even much more ominous than Hillary because she'll bring a racial component and she's younger, end quote. I mean, this is, racist and misogynistic rhetoric at a really, turned up to 11, turned up to a squeal. Jezebel, of course, was, if I'm remembering my Bible correctly, the wife of Ahab, King Ahab, and not the sea captain of lore, but the Israeli king thousands of years ago. And I believe she was killed by the prophet, what was it, Isaiah, I think? Anyway, they threw her out a window. But she was accused of being hypersexual and putting men under her influence with her sexuality. That's where Jezebel comes from. And in America, Melissa Grant notes, to call a black woman a Jezebel harkens back to America's racist and misogynistic history of casting black women as insatiably sexual, which served to justify slaveholding men's systematic sexual assault of enslaved women. And to say that she has a Jezebel spirit is also to say that she's a danger to men, that she's barely a human being, that she's hell-bent on seducing men to their destruction and stealing their power. Wall now goes on to say that it's important for Christians to, quote, start getting involved with the warfare. He called both Trump and Harris flawed instruments of God, now locked in a spiritual contest. He said, Biden's out like we prophesied. Kamala is in, like I said in 2018. My guess is that the devil's plan is to make her president. And then he goes, this is just bizarre stuff. I think it was Elijah actually ultimately killed her, but Jezebel. But the threats are real. The violent rhetoric, the violent groups. Hitler rose to power with the brown shirts. With Mussolini, it was the black shirts. Fascist movements always have a violent street component, and liberal groups don't. I mean, it's just, you only see this with fascist groups. And yes, there are left-wing fascist groups as well. I mean, I think you could safely argue that Lenin was a left-wing fascist. So, but you've got nothing like that in America. There is no left-wing fascist movement in America. There were some people in the Weather Underground, in fact, I knew one of them who ended up in prison, who you could argue were left-wing fascists. But that whole movement in the United States, first of all, was never of any consequence, and secondly, is long, long dead. But on the right, there is an active, aggressive, violent fascist movement that has already claimed a number of lives. They killed 3 police officers and 5 civilians on January 6th. They killed Heather Heyer. In fact, when you look at political violence in the United States, the vast majority of the political murders that have been committed over the last 20 years have been committed by right-wingers. And the percentage by left-wingers is like under 3%. I mean, it's just tiny, tiny, tiny. And I'm not even sure you could legitimately call most of those people left-wingers. So, all that said, what's on your mind today? Let's pick up your calls here. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, happy Friday, Tom. There was a problem with my phone yesterday, but I want to thank you for once again sounding the alarm on the fascist threat that Trump and MAGA represent. Your piece yesterday and President Biden's speech on Wednesday, there are warnings that MAGA doesn't just want to take us back to the 1950s, they want to take us back to the 1850s, the Confederate South. And apropos of that, I think a good slogan for the Harris campaign would be People First, America Forward. But as far as the VP pick goes, I've been advocating for Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She's got a 68% approval rating in Michigan, which is a crucial swing state, as we know. And in my opinion, 2 strong, smart women, they'd offer quite a contrast to the misogyny and ignorance of the MAGA bros. But having said that, Tom, I'm a firm believer in the power of unions, and organized labor really loves Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. And then last night, David Hogg, the Gen Z founder of March for Our Lives, I saw him tell Lawrence O'Donnell that David personally endorses Governor Walz for VP. So, I'd be all on board for you got a Gen Z and organized labor on your side. Those are pretty good endorsements.
Yeah.
So, I'd be on board for a Harris Walz ticket, and I think it would, him being from the upper Midwest, I think it really would help shore up the blue wall in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And as one of your callers pointed out, he is only 60 years old, so he's plenty young as a VP pick. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm all in favor of Tim Walz. I didn't know much about him until I started looking into him today, and people started calling and suggesting him. And my apologies to our listeners in Wisconsin or in Minnesota. Excuse me. Go ahead.
And Tom, and speaking of labor, Mark Kelly, he hasn't even signed on to the PRO Act. I think he just this week just came out and said he is in favor of it, but he hasn't even been for it this whole time. So I think that's a red flag right there.
Yeah,
for him.
There's an abundance of great talent on the Democratic side is the bottom line. It's just and when you look at the Republican Party and you say, where are the statesmen and women? They just Mitt Romney leaving, I think is don't close the door after you, Mitt. Turn the lights off. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour here at the home of the political revolution. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Marianne in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Marianne, what's on your mind today?
I want to follow up on, was that Paul that called earlier, the fellow that wondered why it seemed that, and I'm puzzled about the same thing, why it seems that the MAGA people in the United States bring up anti-Jewish sentiment and yet are for Netanyahu in his war in Israel. And the only thing I can come up with is that likely or possibly that they dislike Islam and Muslims worse, and therefore over in the Middle East they are for this war against which includes many Islamic people.
It could be. I think it's more likely coming out of this Christian belief that really started in the 1880s, 1890s, with Rush Dooney, who reinterpreted Revelation and some other parts of the Bible and came to the conclusion that we actually are now living in the last days, and that a careful reading of Revelation says that in order for Jesus to return to earth and restore paradise on earth and make all things new, that there are a couple of preconditions. And the first one is that there be a massive war in Israel. Actually, the first one is that the Second Temple be rebuilt, which is where the Dome of the Rock is. And that's why Alan Goodman, I was in Israel when this happened. Alan Goodman tried to throw up a tent and next to the Dome of the Rock to claim it was the Second Temple. He was Jewish. He would, there are Jewish, what would you call them? Messiahists, I guess, who are also, you see these bumper stickers sometimes in very Orthodox communities, both in English and in Hebrew, that say Messiah now, or Mashiach now. But anyhow, Alan Goodman thought that he could bring the Messiah down for the first time, but the Christians here, they want to bring Jesus back. And so, number one, the Second Temple has to be built, and the number two, and they think that that's going to happen any day now. And number two, there has to be a horrible war in Israel so that all but 144,000 Jews are killed. And then those 144,000 Jews convert to Christianity, and then Jesus appears in the sky. And
oh wow!
And so, in order to facilitate that, they want to have a very militant guy in Israel who's very warlike, who raises the probability that there will be a war against Israel, and and they want to keep Israel as a intact state so that these things that I just described can be done, because they're just I mean, you can't argue with faith. Faith is the belief in things unseen.
So they want to maintain that land. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, under the control of somebody who would, under Jewish control, because it would require building, rebuilding the Second Temple. And there is a huge debate going on in Israel about, what should be done about the Dome of the Rock and what should be done with that land. And now they've buried under the Wailing Wall, because that Second Temple is right above it, and the old Solomonic Temple is behind it, behind the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. And there's a huge yeshiva there where they teach Orthodox kids or Hasidic kids. And, there's some talk about maybe just tunneling into where the original temple was and building a new temple there. So who knows what's going to happen here, Marianne, but I think that's probably their primary motivation. I got to run. Marianne, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Bouncing through the sky, traveling far beyond where stars reside. Messages and melodies.
Welcome back, 22 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, what's up?
Happy Freya's Day. She was a goddess of love, and I think the Democrats should say Democrats love women more better, because Democrats are philogynist. The opposite of misogynist are philogynist, and that's what Democrats are. But I want to talk about the Senate. Late at night, one night on July the 7th, Eamon on MSNBC was talking about how the good intentions of the Founding Fathers have gone awry. With the Electoral College, we've had these pseudo-elections where minority people got put in, selected as president, not elected.
George Bush and Donald Trump, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Pseudo-elections. All right. Now, he talked about the Senate, the good intentions to promote democracy, which is supposed to be the majority rules, but the Senate has gone awry because like 30% of the population controls 70 of the senators. Now, indulge me in a fantasy brainstorm. Maybe there would be a reform movement in the future where they eliminate the Senate and have a unicameral House of Representatives with about 600 members or something and do away with the Senate. But barring that, Tom, with the minority controlling the Senate and thwarting the rule and the wish of the majority, is there any reform that can be done to make the Senate work better, or does it need to be abolished because it's as Eamon talked about, is promoting minority control? Yeah. And people want abortion for women. People want gun control. People want all these things that the minority is suppressing.
Yeah, reasonable health care, free college. No, I'm with you, Keno. Keno, instead of the 2 options that you suggested, I would suggest a third option. Back in the 1980s, the Republicans realized that control of America could be achieved by and large by controlling the Senate. And as you point out, right now about 30% of Americans are represented in the red states that are the Senate. And so what they did is they set up this infrastructure of right-wing radio stations in low-population states. It was very inexpensive. I mean, you know, to buy a radio station in a city like Portland or a big city like New York can cost you $2-3 million here in Portland and probably $50 or $100 million in New York. But to buy a radio station in some little town in Oklahoma, you could probably do that for $250,000, and or build one from scratch. And so, you know, they set up this network of right-wing radio throughout the 80s and throughout the 90s in these red states, and used that to basically turn those states just hard right. You know, a lot of these states were controlled by Democrats up until relatively recently, just the last 20 years or so. And I believe that right-wing radio was the main thing that made the change, and Democrats never got the memo. And, you know, what Democrats should do, in my opinion, is target a handful, 5 or 6, of the smaller red states, you know, Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, you know, I'd have to look at a map, but anyhow, you know, Montana, a handful of the lower population red states where media is cheap, and start buying radio stations and putting progressive talk radio on there. And I realize I have a dog in this fight. They don't have to put me on the air. There's a lot of good progressive talent out there. But get you know, a progressive democratic message out, and you know, provide some competition for the right-wing radio. You won't see instant results, but I can tell you, you know, Air America Radio became a thing in, as I recall, late 2004, might have been early 2005. And there's a whole bunch of people who give credit for Obama winning in 2008 to the fact that we were on 54 radio stations across the nation when I was on Air America Radio, when Air America existed. And we helped get Obama elected. I don't think Obama would have been elected if we didn't have Air America, because we were on the air in all those states, and then got him reelected. And then it wasn't until Mitt Romney decided that he wanted to run for office that he had his company, Bain Capital, buy Clear Channel, because we were, all 54 of the stations we were on were Clear Channel stations, and kick us off the air, which they did. And, you know, that was the end of that. So that's my strategy, Keith.
Tom, can I say, there's a book that addresses white rural rage. The Democrats should do more for these states that are losing population.
I'm with you. Well, they're doing a lot. I mean, they're building roads and bridges like crazy, and but nobody's messaging it. And that's the problem. Keno, I got to run, but thank you. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today.
Of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, Trump triumphs, and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
I hear the chatter, I see the screams. A world divided it seems. Voices shouting, truth obscured, but in my heart I'm reassured. I won't be swayed by all the noise. I'll speak my mind, I'll raise my voice. Not here to preach or spread the news.
Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. John in Long Island, New York. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi, Sean. I wanted to talk about the espionage case against Trump. And I think that Jack Smith, yes. I think Jack Smith should withdraw his appeal, actually. I think this is not the right way to take that second bite of the apple here for this, because I think that what's going to happen is even if he wins the appeal, then he's going to have to try and get her dismissed from the case. He's got a lot of evidence, but I think that's very risky, because if she still stays on the case, then it's a whole waste of time, because she's in charge of sentencing. She'll give him a month of probation, even if it's a conviction. It's just she's completely shown her cards. She's completely biased. It's a total waste of time.
Right.
And in fact, there's no reason that apparently the Attorney General can just put his name over Jack Smith's and just refile the case, and Merrick Garland should just prosecute, because this is a huge national security issue. I mean, I can't believe that there hasn't been an investigation. I can't believe Trump hasn't been asked who he's told and been interrogated and questioned. I mean, this is shocking.
I suspect all that stuff will come after the election, John. I think that they've been holding back because we're so close to the election, and they don't want it to seem like the Biden administration is persecuting Trump or trying to go after a political enemy, as much as Trump is squealing about that. This should have been done, frankly, 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago.
Right, but the idea of this whole thing that they can't seem partisan is why we're in this mess to begin with.
I agree.
It's a joke. It's as if did Merrick Garland think that the Republicans would not blame Biden anyway, even if no matter who took up this case?
God only knows what he thought. There is some truth to the fact that it does take time to prepare a case, but it didn't take 3 years. It didn't take 2.5 years for them to prepare this case. And for that matter, they could have gone after him for the things that Robert Mueller found. Robert Mueller found 10 cases, 10 examples. He documented them, 10 examples of Donald Trump committing obstruction of justice, trying to cover up his connections to Russia, and they're all prosecutable, and they were all prosecutable, and most of them were still within the statute of limitations right after Biden became president.
Yeah. And this is why I think Kamala's first duty is to fire Merrick Garland immediately, day one. And I don't know why she doesn't even.
Well, she was a prosecutor. She was an attorney general. She knows what's going on. Right. I agree with you.
I mean, Biden's going to have his own son put to jail because of their own weaknesses. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah.
And just one quick point. We're in this whole predicament because the same mentality back in 2016 when James Comey thought, well, I don't want to seem partisan, so even though I would never do this, I'm going to bring up the email case right at the last minute because because he's afraid of the fascist blowback.
I'm not sure it was that. James Comey is a lifelong Republican. I think he might have just wanted to hurt Hillary, which is what he did.
No, I don't. Well, maybe.
I mean, it was a true October surprise.
It backfired on him because I think he thought whatever he thought. Right, it was a huge gift to Trump, and he gets fired for it. I mean, But my opinion, I hear what you're saying, and that could be, but I really think that it's that whole fascist blowing at people that they get scared and they're afraid and they think that they better cow a bit. They better not be, and because they think that they're on the right side and they think that their way is going to work, but it never does. And Hillary would have easily won if that didn't happen. And I blame this all on Comey back then. So
yeah, I'm with you. I got it, John. Thank you very much. Ricky in Castro Valley, California. Hey, Ricky, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Good to hear you. Thanks for taking my call. Real quick, I'm thinking Shapiro, maybe Kelly, but Shapiro should likely have to soften his stance in Israel and align himself with future President Kamala.
He gave a speech today. He gave a speech on behalf of Kamala Harris today, and I have not heard it. I just saw little clips of it on MSNBC that's playing here in the studio, just in case any big news breaks. And I am looking forward to reading the transcript of that speech and see what he said. I don't know.
I thought, well, he's an attack dog. He's a firebrand, and he just really goes relentlessly after Trump, which is actually would be great for him, because could you imagine him and squaring off with JD, whoever he is?
Yeah.
He would just eat that guy for lunch.
Yeah, I think his real name is James Donald Bowman. But and then for a while he called himself Jimmy Hamill. So I don't know who
that's
he
a product of self. That's a product of self-hatred. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't like who he is, and he's clearly come across in his book as he sort of trashed his entire family. But real quick, Tom, I know you got to go. I was the deputy district director for Congresswoman Barbara Lee back in the mid 2000s. I was there for 7-8 years. Mm-hmm. We collaborated with Kamala and with Ron Dellums. Mm-hmm. She is a brilliant, kind, thoughtful person. Mm-hmm. This racial stuff that they're going to come out with will be countered, because we're not having it. You have white women having calls, Hispanics, gay people, black people. Look, we're not having it this time around. I was in great despair when Joe stepped down, and my wife and I were just distraught. And I have been so energized, so much so I'm giving weekly to Kamala's campaign. I have volunteered to work on her behalf. And the great irony of this, Tom, is way back when she was elected DA of San Francisco, I was asked to do a catering job through a friend from college for her banquet or gathering. Mm-hmm. And boy, I'm like, I can't afford it. I'm sorry, because they couldn't really pay me. And now I'm thinking, here I am 20 years later or so, I wish I'd have done that. That has been a great...
You would have, I get it.
Hey, that might have been my entree into her world.
Yeah.
But I did, those years with Barbara Lee was so fruitful. We were down in South Carolina, getting out the vote. We worked very hard for President Obama, and I intend to do the same for Kamala as a retired man who has nothing else to do but to give back. But we're in a better place. I am so much more confident. I don't understand this Trump phenomenon. We are a sick country. But if they can do it in Europe, we can do it here.
Yeah, God bless you, Ricky. And Barbara Lee is iconic. She is just one of the great stateswomen of our time. Ricky, thank you. Thanks for the call, and thanks for the encouraging note. Richard in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for mentioning that article. I forget what it was in on Opus Dei.
Yeah.
And in that article,
I can tell you where it was in just a second.
A few days ago.
It's, hang on just a minute. Here it is. It was in The Guardian. It's in The Guardian today.
Okay, today. Okay, well, I knew. Okay, anyway, it also says Leonard Leo.
Yep.
Goes to that formation every Friday with Roberts.
Yes.
They're both the same. And you should tell, Opus Dei means work of God when you translate it. So that gives you a clue as those folks are thinking as to what they're doing. Both Opus Dei wants to take the church back before Vatican II, which is roughly the late 1950s.
Yeah, they want to go back to the Latin Mass, too.
So, yeah, they do. In fact, that's what you get. It's anyway.
Yeah.
so do the MAGA Republicans. They have that in common.
Yeah.
That's kind of where they're heading.
See, I think they should go back to the Latin Mass. But
Tom, don't please.
Well, no, look at how Jews learn Hebrew in order to go through their bar mitzvah. There's a kind of in-club, thing to it that I think strengthens people, and I like the idea of people being strengthened in their faith, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, whatever.
I've heard you talk about learning and how learning music, etc., helps your old brain, which is mine is 80 years old. I can but the problem is what goes along with that Latin Mass.
Yeah.
Very anti-Jewish, very.
Oh no, I get all that. I'm not a fan of the historic anti-Semitism.
And little kids are bored to tears with anyway. Enough of that.
But I think it's also important to note that the Catholic Church is, while they have had a very checkered past, they've also had some very, very high points in their present. I mean, the movement for human and civil rights in the '60s, a lot of that came out of Catholics. Father Berrigan
I can name you saints that are saintly people that
we named our oldest daughter after Teresa of Avila. Interior Castle and Dark Night of the Soul, St. John of the Cross are two of my favorite books. I reread them every 4 or 5 years.
And Mother Teresa came to Little Rock, and when I met her, just something about looking in her eyes. I don't know. I can't tell you.
She's a good person.
This is just getting way off the subject.
Yeah,
well, she's also got problems, but they're tough, though. This Opus Dei people, as you read that even Francis can't control them.
Yeah.
So, and I guess let me finish. The church, the founding fathers are correct. Keep church and state separate.
Yeah.
So,
amen. Yep. And
thank you.
I'm with you. Thank you, Richard. And I'll stop talking about the Catholic Church when the Catholic Church stops dropping millions and millions of dollars a year into anti-abortion and political activity in the United States. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for We the People. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Ardeen in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hey, Ardeen, what's up?
Hi. I just wanted to call you. Happy Friday, too. I live in Colorado Springs. I have a good friend that works at the Air Force Academy Library. Mm-hmm. Not the one for the cadets, the one for the general public, the families that live at the academy. Mm-hmm. And she is dealing with, they had a new protocol that they have to incorporate. Basically for the banning of the books. One of the pillars of the protocol that they do is the person has to read the book. They not just come in with excerpt, little passages within the book stating that they want it banned. There's a lot of theft up there now. There's a lot of miscategorizing books. They're basically terrorizing the library. They have to incorporate a lot of stuff because the people are wanting to do the books, and they've infiltrated the federal library basically. And the one thing that aggravates the H out of me is that education of our youth is the one cornerstone to a free society.
Yes.
And if we do not have the books, which is a cornerstone to education, we don't have it. We don't have an educated and free society. We don't. We will not have it.
Yeah, I
agree. It's horrifying that they're doing that.
Yep.
And it's it's like as an example, at the Air Force Academy, our last graduating class, it was 900 plus people. They graduated in the end of, I think, May. Mm-hmm. And we had 31% of that graduating class were their first assignment was Space Force here at Peterson Air Force Base.
Oh,
and it's like, this is an amazing accomplishment to get to that level. And these cadets that go in there, we actually sponsored a cadet years ago. And the kid went in there with a 4.8 GPA. These are not uneducated people that are going in there. And it makes me feel good and proud that the Academy is pumping out well-educated people, well-rounded people. And they're going in there and trying to stifle the elementary schools that are on the Academy. They're trying to stifle the education of the people, of the kids.
Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Has there been any, you seem to know quite a bit about the Air Force Academy. I'm curious if Mikey Weinstein's efforts with his Religious Freedom Foundation, I think it's called, his son went through the Air Force Academy, and who is Jewish, and they tried to indoctrinate him in right-wing Christianity, and that led, Dad, Mikey, to into all this blowback. Has there been any lasting effect of that?
I have not known that to happen. I think I'm pulled away from the Academy. I live on the south end towards Fort Carson, basically. I'm not at the Academy area anymore, so I don't know of that going on. I know there's a lot of reconstruction and all that at the Academy. I know that's going on. They're building massive up there. I don't know where they got the money, but they have a hotel being built on the Academy. Wow. The North Gate, they're doing all kinds. They're doing a lot of stuff up there. They're revamping a lot, and I anticipate because of Space Force. Yeah.
Okay. Ardeen, thank you. Thanks for the call and thanks for the information. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a second. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
In the heart of our hometown, where the streets are bustling around, we gather beneath the morning sun. Together we can get things done. Every voice, every hand, together we can make a stand. Tag your interest, join the fight for our future, for what's right.
Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Mike in El Paso, Texas. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I just wanted to say that, or I want to talk about how, how the fascism seems to be setting in. And if you read the capitalist texts or like books that Lenin wrote, he says that fascism is just capitalism in decline.
Yeah, I have read Lenin, and I'm not, I read the Communist Manifesto.
Basically, the main problem with capitalism is that the workers that work for a business producing goods don't get paid enough to buy back all the stuff that they produce, right? So
I think that when the Communist Manifesto was written, the idea of regulated capitalism, heavily regulated capitalism, like we see in particularly in the Scandinavian countries right now, didn't exist. And I think that there is a clear alternative to fascism, which is the merger of state and corporate interests on the one hand, communism, where there is no corporate interest, everything is run by the state on the other hand, in this middle ground, that we don't need to go with laissez-faire raw capitalism like Republicans have been pitching since 1980. Instead, regulated capitalism has been demonstrated to work. We just need to get money out of politics, and we need to be, breaking up big corporations. We need to be enforcing the antitrust acts, and having reasonable regulations. Mike, thanks for the call. Janet in Strongville, Ohio. Hey, Janet, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, my choices for VP, my first choice was Pete Buttigieg. I don't think that's going to happen. I love the idea of Julian Castro. You have the best callers who call in with great ideas, but also someone that I've been thinking about a lot is David Pepper. I know he's a good friend, but he has no, name recognition, but man, is he smart.
Yeah. They're going to want somebody with a governing background, and I think the top of his career in that regard was, running the Democratic Party in Ohio, which I don't think is going to qualify him for VP.
That is true.
He is
that
brilliant,
is true, but
though.
People need to keep.
I love him. He's a great man.
JD Vance is a fraud. He is.
Yep.
He was brought to Mar-a-Lago by Peter Thiel, and people they should never mention JD Vance without mentioning Peter Thiel, who is an awful libertarian billionaire who will do terrible things to this country and especially to poor people. Should he be, should, heaven forbid, Donald Trump be elected. Tim Ryan never should have lost to him. I never heard Tim Ryan did not have to run against JD Vance. He just needed to run against Peter Thiel, and I never heard those words come out of his mouth.
Yeah, which was unfortunate.
Anyway, but the one thing I wanted to say, and why I will be forever grateful for Donald Trump, and I say this to a very good Democratic friend of mine, is Donald Trump managed to knock Jeb Bush out of the 2016 primary. Jeb was whining on and on during one of the debates about how great his mother was, and Trump looked over at him and said, "Then why isn't your mother running?" And his campaign collapsed like a deck of cards. Shortly
Low energy
thereafter.
Jeb. Yeah. No, I recall.
Yes.
And Jeb was the guy who handed the 2000 election to George by knocking 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida. 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months before the election. Greg Palast blew that story open. Greg's got another one that he's going to be sharing with us too next week, by the way. Janet, I got to move along, but thank you. Spot on. I agree. Very, very well said. Mike in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I want to talk about federal public land.
Mm-hmm.
And we as American citizens, we own 640 million acres of federal public land in this country. And since the 1980s, the Reagan sagebrush rebels, the Republican platform has included the privatization of that 640 million acres of land.
I know.
And that is part of that is also part of Project 2025.
Yep.
So any American that hikes or hunts or fishes or enjoys drinking clean water or breathing clean air should be against the GOP privatization of our federal public land. And
well said, Mike. Mike, I'm sorry, I've got to cut you off. I'm out of time. But well said. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jay LeBlanc, Jeremy Peterson, Mark Thoman, Connor Arroyo, and Carnaverdi, all the fine people who work on this program. And to you, thank you so much for listening or watching or participating or calling and for sharing our show with your friends and letting our advertisers and stations know you're listening. Get out there, get active, tag You're It, and have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Is corporate ethics an oxymoron?
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!